Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling, well, one of America's oldest and most baffling cold cases.
The Lost Colony of Roanoke. It really is a classic unsolved mystery, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's got everything early explorers, ambition, hardship, and then just silence. We're talking late 16th century, England trying to get a foothold in North America.
Specifically on Roanoke Island, which is now part of Dare County, North Carolina. A pretty exposed spot on the Outer Banks.
And this wasn't their first crack at it, right? There was an earlier attempt before the famous Lost Colony.
That's right. First came the Lane Colony in 1585, which didn't last long. They were gone by 1586.
But it's the second group, the one set up in 1587, that vanished. That's the core of the mystery we're diving into.
Over 100 people, men, women, children, just gone.
So our mission today is to sort of unpack all that, look at the history, what led up to the disappearance, the few clues they left.
The main theories about what happened, and also touch on the modern science and archaeology still trying to find answers. It's a story that really captures the imagination.
It really does. It shows how history isn't always neat and tidy. So let's start at the beginning, before the colonies even landed. Raleigh's first exploratory trip.
Right. The Amadas Barlow expedition in 1584. This wasn't meant to be a settlement. It was pure reconnaissance.
Just scoping things out. Philip Amadas and Arthur Barlow leading two ships.
Exactly. Find a good spot, report back. That was the goal.
And when they got to the Outer Banks, Roanoke Island, what did they think?
Well, Arthur Barlow wrote quite glowingly about it, described it as most plentiful, sweet, fruitful, and wholesome. Painted a very rosy picture.
Sounds appealing, maybe too appealing.
Perhaps. It certainly encouraged Raleigh. They also made contact with the local people, the Carolina Algonquians.
The Secatan and Croatoan tribes.
Yes, those are the main groups they encountered initially. And this contact was pretty significant because they actually brought two Native Americans back to England.
Manteo and Wanchese.
Manteo, who was Croatoan, and Wanchese, who was Secatan. They caused quite a stir in London, provided intelligence sort of ambassadors in a way.
And Queen Elizabeth was impressed enough to name the whole territory Virginia and knight Raleigh. So stage set for a bigger attempt.
Which brings us to the Lane Colony, 1585. This was a much bigger deal. 7 ships, about 600 men.
600, that's substantial, but more military, you said.
Yeah, the focus was less on building a town and more on military presence, exploration, seeing what resources were there. Ralph Lane was governor.
Sir Richard Grenville was in overall command, though. And they had experts along, Thomas Harriot the scientist, John White the artist.
Joachim Gans, a metallurgist too. They were serious about assessing the potential. But the voyage itself, well, it hit snags.
Oh, what kind of snags?
Storms, delays, apparently some bad blood between Grenville and Lane,
Right.
And then disaster right as they arrived.
What happened?
Grenville's flagship, the Tiger, hit a shoal near Wokokan Island.
Where?
Ruined most of their food supply.
Oh, man. That's a terrible way to start. Suddenly finding food is priority number one.
Exactly, it forced their hand. They did build a small fort on Roanoke, but they became increasingly dependent on the local Secatan people for food.
And that relationship started to sour, didn't it?
It really did. The English brought diseases the Native Americans had no immunity to, which caused deaths, and, understandably, resentment.
And the Secatan chief, Lungina, who later called himself Pemisapen, he became hostile.
Yes, he started trying to cut off their food supplies. Things got tense.
And Lane's reaction?
It was brutal. Lane launched a preemptive attack and killed Pemisapan.
Wow. Okay, so relations are completely broken down at this point.
Pretty much. Then, just as things seemed desperate, Sir Francis Drake showed up in June 1586 with his fleet.
Unexpected rescue.
Sort of. There was also a hurricane that did more damage. Lane surveyed the situation, low supplies, hostile neighbors, and decided to cut his losses. He evacuated the colony with Drake.
Left the fort empty. But didn't they leave some men behind? Or rather, Grenville did later.
Well, Lane left 3 men behind who couldn't be found at the last minute. Then Grenville finally arrived with the overdue supplies, found the place deserted.
Except for the 3.
No, they were gone too. So Grenville left 15 of his own men to hold the fort and then sailed off.
And those 15 men?
Their fate was grim. Reports suggest they were attacked by a coalition of mainland tribes. Maybe 2 survived, fled inland, but essentially they vanished too. It's an ominous prelude.
Definitely sets a dark tone for the next attempt. You'd think Raleigh might have paused after all that?
You might think. But he was encouraged by people like Richard Hakluyt, Harriet, John White, the artist from the first colony. They pushed for another try.
And this time the plan was different, wasn't it? Destination Chesapeake Bay.
That was the intention. A potentially better location further north. But things went wrong almost immediately upon arrival in July 1587.
Oh, so.
The pilot, Simon Fernandez, who seems to have been a controversial figure, essentially refused to sail them further north and insisted they disembark on Roanoke. Again.
Force them to stay on Roanoke? Why?
It's debated. Maybe he wanted to get back to privateering quickly. Maybe he genuinely thought Roanoke was suitable. Whatever the reason, they were stuck there.
And this group was different. John White was now governor, and it was families this time, right? Women and children.
Yes, about 115 people total. Much more focused on establishing a proper civilian settlement. White's own daughter, Eleanor Dare, was there, pregnant. Her husband, Ananias Dare, too. Manteo also returned with them.
So, a real attempt at putting down roots, but they arrived to find... what?
They found the fort basically in ruins and skeletal remains. Pretty clear evidence Grenville's 15 men hadn't lasted long.
Not a good sign. And relations with the locals.
Immediately tense. One of the colonists, George Howe, was killed while fishing alone, likely by Secondton warriors.
And White retaliated.
He did. He led an attack on a village he thought belonged to the Secondton responsible, but it turned out to be a Croatoan village. They attacked friendly natives by mistake.
Oh, that's terrible. Just compounding the problem.
Exactly. But amidst all this, there was one hopeful event.
Virginia Dare.
The birth of Virginia Dare, John White's granddaughter, on August 18th, 1587. The first English child born in the New World. A symbol of hope, perhaps.
A fleeting one, maybe. Because the situation was still dire, wasn't it? Supplies running low.
Critically low. The colonists apparently decided amongst themselves that they needed to relocate maybe 50 miles inland, up Albemarle Sound, but they also realized they desperately needed help from England.
So they convinced White to go back.
Yes, apparently against his initial wishes. He agreed to sail back in late August 1587 to organize release more supplies, more settlers.
And they agreed on a signal in case they moved while he was gone.
The crucial signal. If they moved, they'd carve their destination onto a tree or post. If they left under duress, in danger, they'd add a cross pate, a Maltese cross shape.
And the agreed destination word was?
Croatoan, referring to the island where Manteo's people lived, south of Roanoke.
So White leaves, expecting to be back relatively soon, but he wasn't, was he?
No. 3 long years. The war with Spain intervened. The Spanish Armada mobilization in 1588 meant basically all available English ships were pressed into military service.
So he couldn't get a ship back.
He tried. A small relief attempt in 1588 with 2 little ships failed. They got into fights with French ships, lost their supplies, had to turn back. It wasn't until 1590 that he finally managed to hitch a ride on a privateering expedition heading to the Caribbean.
Must have been agonizing for him.
Yeah.
Finally gets back to Roanoke in August 1590, arriving on his granddaughter Virginia's 3rd birthday.
Imagine that timing. But when they landed, nothing. The settlement area was empty.
No colonists, any signs at all.
They found fresh tracks in the sand, indicating people had been there relatively recently, but no colonists. Then they saw the carvings.
There's clues.
On one tree, just the letters C-R-O, and then on a prominent post of the palisade they'd built around the settlement site, the full word, C-R-O-A-T-O-A-N.
Croatoan. And crucially, no cross.
No cross pate, just the word. White took this, quite reasonably, as the agreed-upon sign that they had moved peacefully to Croatoan Island, where Manteo's people were.
Okay, so a clear message. But was everything else consistent with a peaceful, planned move?
That's where it gets a bit ambiguous. The houses have been taken down, dismantled, suggests an orderly departure. But White also mentioned his own chests had been dug up and looted, things scattered about. And strangely, no boats were found anywhere along the shore.
So maybe planned, but maybe also a bit hasty. Or something interrupted them, and no boats is weird.
It is. Very perplexing.
So White sees Croatoan, assumes they went there. Did he go look?
He tried. They planned to sail south to Croatoan Island the next day. But, true to form for this story, a major storm blew up. Rough seas, they lost an anchor.
More bad luck.
The captain of the ship decided it was too dangerous to stay or risk grounding the ship. They were forced to abandon the search and head back towards England.
Without ever checking Croatoan Island.
Without ever checking. And that was it. The last real attempt to find them by anyone directly involved.
And so begins the mystery proper. What happened to those 100+ people? Let's get into the theories. The most obvious one, given the clue, is integration, right? They went to live with the Croatoan.
That's definitely a leading theory, and it has been since the very beginning. People were speculating about assimilation almost immediately by the early 1600s.
The Croatian people lived on what's now Hatteras Island, right?
Yes. And later, in the early 1700s, the explorer John Lawson visited the Hatteras people there and reported some of them claimed they had white ancestors. He even mentioned some having gray eyes.
Interesting. Are there links to other tribes too? I've heard the Lumbee people mentioned.
Yes, the Lumbee in North Carolina have a long oral tradition connecting them to the Roanoke colonists, and they were even officially recognized as Croatoan Indians for a time. Connections to the Catawba and Corey tribes have also been suggested.
And there are stories, aren't there, about Native Americans with European features showing up over the years?
There are, though separating fact from folklore is tricky. And some instances could just be albinism, as you noted earlier. But the resistance of these stories is significant.
What about archaeology on Hatteras? Found anything?
Yes. Archaeologists like Mark Horton have found European trade goods and artifacts from the right time period mixed in with native settlements on Hatteras Island. It doesn't prove assimilation, but it's certainly consistent with it. It's probably the strongest physical evidence supporting that theory.
Okay, so assimilation is a strong contender. What else? There's the theory about them moving north, after all, to the Chesapeake and meeting a bad end there.
Right, the Powhatan attack theory, most associated with historian David Beers Quinn. He argued the colonists did manage to relocate to the southern Chesapeake Bay area as originally intended, but were later wiped out by the powerful Powhatan Confederacy, maybe around 1607, just as Jamestown was being established. Perhaps Chief Powhatan saw them as a threat or potential rival English presence.
Is there evidence for that?
It relies heavily on accounts written later by Jamestown settlers like William Strachey and Samuel Purchas, who reported hearing stories from the Powhatan about killing colonists in that area. But the reliability and interpretation of those accounts are heavily debated by historians. There's no direct archaeological proof of a Roanoke settlement or massacre site in the Chesapeake yet.
Okay, so more speculative. What about the idea they tried to get home? Took the pinnace, the small ship they had, and tried to sail back to England.
It's possible. Not probable, perhaps, but possible. People did make perilous transatlantic voyages in small boats back then. There's even a precedent of French colonists managing it earlier.
Where would they have aimed for? Straight across?
Maybe. Or maybe sail north, hoping to run into the English fishing fleets off Newfoundland and get passage home that way.
But the challenge is a small boat, enough food and water for maybe 100 people, the Atlantic storms.
Huge challenge. It would have been incredibly dangerous, a real long shot. And if they failed, they'd vanish without a trace at sea.
Fits the vanishing part, I suppose. Now, there are some wilder theories, too. Conspiracy.
There are always conspiracies. Lee Miller proposed one involving Sir Francis Walsingham, Queen Elizabeth's spy master, deliberately sabotaging Raleigh's colony, maybe ruining them to undermine him politically.
Why would he do that?
Miller suggests complex court politics, maybe religious motives. She argues relief was deliberately delayed. It's intricate, but most historians find it unconvincing. Walsingham generally supported Raleigh, and the pilot Fernandez did bring White back eventually.
Okay, what about local legends? Something about Beachland.
Ah yes, the Beachland theory. This relies on local traditions near the Alligator River, inland from Roanoke. Stories of an early settlement there, even reports of finding small coffins.
So the idea is Raleigh secretly sent them there, maybe for sassafras.
That's the gist, that Raleigh faked the records about Chesapeake Bay and sent them to this hidden spot to harvest sassafras, which was becoming valuable. It's based almost entirely on oral history and one ambiguous map. The timeline for sassafras prices doesn't quite fit either. It's pretty fringe.
And the Spanish. Could they have found the colony and destroyed it? They certainly didn't want England setting up shop nearby.
It's a plausible scenario on the surface. Spain claimed the whole coast, and they had destroyed the French Fort Caroline in Florida decades earlier. They knew the English were trying to colonize. But Spanish records show they were still actively looking for the English colony, mainly searching up in the Chesapeake Bay area as late as 1600. It seems if they had found and destroyed Roanoke, they wouldn't still be searching for it years later. They seemed as clueless as the English.
Okay. One more specific clue, the Cora's tree.
Right, a live oak on Hatteras Island that apparently had Cora carved into it. Some suggest this points to a move towards the Corey tribe, who live further inland near Lake Mattamuskeet.
But is the carving old, from the right time?
That's the problem. Dating tree carvings is extremely difficult, borderline impossible with any certainty. The tree's age doesn't prove when the carving was made. It's intriguing, but inconclusive.
And finally, the Dare stones. These caused a big stir for a while.
They did. A series of stones, supposedly inscribed by Eleanor Dare, detailing the colonists' wanderings and eventual deaths, found scattered across several states starting in the 1930s.
But they're mostly fakes, right?
Almost certainly, except perhaps for the very first one discovered. Linguistic analysis, geological testing.
Hmm.
Most evidence points to them being an elaborate hoax. Fascinating story, but not real history, unfortunately.
So, lots of theories, but nothing concrete. Which brings us to modern science and archaeology. What have they been able to add?
Well, early efforts focused on just preserving the Fort Raleigh site on Roanoke. It was damaged by tourism development. It finally reconstructed the earthwork fort in 1950.
But actual scientific analysis, what about the climate?
That was a big breakthrough in 1998. Scientists used dendrochronology tree ring analysis.
Right, dating tree rings.
They studied ancient cypress trees in the region and found evidence of an extreme drought between 1587 and 1589, right when the lost colony was trying to survive.
The worst drought in how long?
The worst in 800 years for that area. This would have crippled their ability to grow food and likely strained relations with native tribes competing for scarce resources. It adds crucial environmental context.
That's huge. What about genetics? Trying to find descendants.
There have been ongoing efforts, like the Lost Colony DNA Project, trying to find genetic links between potential descendants, especially within Native American communities like the Lumbee or Hatteras, and known relatives of the colonists back in England.
Any luck?
It's incredibly challenging. You need good comparison samples, and we don't have any DNA from the colonists themselves, since no bodies have been found. So far, no definitive genetic link proving descent has been established. The science is improving, but it's a tough puzzle.
And digging. Good old archaeology. Have they found anything definitive on Roanoke Island itself?
Frustratingly little that could be tied exclusively to the 1587 lost colony. There were excavations back in the 1890s, then more serious work by people like Ivor Noel Hume later. They found artifacts from the period, yes, pottery, tools. But the problem is distinguishing them from things left by the earlier 1585 Lane colony, or items traded later between Europeans and natives. There was that interesting ring found at Cape Creek.
The one thought to be gold.
Yeah, initially thought to be gold, maybe belonging to one of the colonists named Kendall, but later analysis showed it was brass, and its origin is uncertain. No smoking gun artifact is turned up on Roanoke itself.
And still no human remains from the 1587 group.
None found so far. One major reason might simply be erosion. The northern end of Roanoke Island, where the settlement was, has eroded significantly over 400 years. A lot of the site could literally be underwater now.
Ah, so the evidence might just be washed away. But there's been exciting news from off Roanoke Island recently, hasn't there? New sites.
Yes, this is where things have gotten really interesting in the last decade or so. The first Colony Foundation was studying John White's 1585 map.
His own map.
Yes, La Virginia Pars. Using imaging techniques, they found a symbol for a fort hidden under a patch on the map, located inland in Bertie County. They called it Site X.
And they dug there.
They did. And they found late 16th century English pottery, specifically North Devon, plain baluster jars, Tudor pottery, and even part of a flintlock. Artifacts strongly suggesting a small group of colonists lived there.
Wow. Peacefully. Away from Roanoke.
It seems that way. The type of pottery suggests maybe a small group possibly integrating with the local native community. Research is ongoing to confirm the link and timing definitively, but it's very promising.
Any other potential sites?
Yes, ongoing work by groups like the Archaeological Conservancy and researchers like Nick Lucchetti have identified other sites, roughly 50 miles west and south of Roanoke, yielding similar Tudor-era artifacts. And Horton's work on Hatteras continues to find European items in native contexts.
So the picture emerging now is maybe dispersal. Small groups moving inland or south, integrating.
That seems to be where the most compelling recent evidence is pointing. Not one single fate, perhaps, but colonists splitting up, trying to survive by joining different native communities in the wider region.
It's incredible. After 400 years, the story is still unfolding, thanks to this research, but still no final definitive answer.
No. The mystery endures. That Croatoan carving is still the most direct clue, pointing towards assimilation on Hatteras Island. But Site X and these other finds suggest a more complex picture of dispersal. We still don't know exactly what happened to every individual.
A failed attempt to sail home is still possible for some. Massacre is still possible for others. We just don't know for sure.
Precisely. The lack of a single verifiable narrative is what keeps the lost colony so captivating.
But the search absolutely continues. Archaeology, genetics, historical analysis, they keep chipping away at it.
And each new find adds another piece, however small, prompting us to rethink the possibilities. It's a powerful reminder of the challenges of early colonization, intercultural contact, and frankly, how hard it is to read the distant past from scattered fragments.
So, as we wrap up, here's something for you, the listener, to think about. If you could find just one piece of evidence tomorrow, what would it need to be to finally solve the Roanoke mystery for good? What does this enduring puzzle, the silence from the past, really tell us about those early days and how we try to understand history? It's a question that definitely lingers. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.